The U.S. Justice Department announcing today a crackdown on financial fraud. It's resulted in 343 criminal defendants involving more than $8.3 billion in estimated losses and 189 civil defendants with $2.1 billion in losses since August. But who knows what's ahead for whistleblower cases? The Securities and Exchange Commission says it plans to delay setting up a new whistleblower office and 4 other offices created under the Dodd-Frank financial overhaul. Well, the reason, of course, is money. And joining us from Chicago to discuss what's ahead for these whistleblowing provisions are Reuben Guttman. He's partner with Grant and Eisenhofer. He represented one of the 6 main whistleblowers in the government's $2.3 billion settlement with Pfizer back in 2009. We also have Steven Pearlman on the other side. He's an employment litigator with Seyfarth Shaw, who was appointed to serve as a special assistant attorney general for the state of Illinois in employment litigation matters. Now, I'm going to throw this out to both of you. How do the Dodd-Frank whistleblower provisions actually expand on Sarbanes-Oxley? I tend to think of Dodd-Frank as being very specific to financial firms.
Sure,
well,
thanks. Previously, you could report fraud, but you'd only get a bounty if the fraud encompassed insider trading. The Dodd-Frank is obviously more expansive and goes to any kind of fraud that the SEC has jurisdiction over, including claims involving the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So it's a very, very broad statute, and it incentivizes whistleblowers to step forward and provide very important information to the SEC, which is a regulatory and enforcement body.
Now, Reuben, I don't know if you want to add to that at all, but I did have a question. I mean, we talked a little bit about this during the break, that one of the biggest things about the whistleblower provisions in Dodd-Frank is the sum that is offered to a whistleblower if there is, in fact, if the SEC does find original information that does end up in a conviction. And excuse me if I'm using the wrong expression here, that the person, the whistleblower, can actually receive up to 30% of the total amount that's recovered. That's greater than $1 million. In your view, will that inspire a number of whistleblowers to sort of show up that would otherwise have stayed in the, behind the scenes?
Well, certainly we hope so, and I would say parenthetically that it's probably never going to be as much as the CEOs and the corporate managers who are benefiting from the fraud and took benefits based on unlawful revenue schemes. But the most important thing that you've got to understand is that it's up to 30%, but basically the Securities and Exchange Commission can allocate that money or portion it amongst numerous whistleblowers so they can incentivize a number of people to come forward and flesh out the claims at hand and make the best possible case. So I think it's a very, very effective provision that Congress put into effect this year.
Stephen, what's your opinion on this? I mean, you're sort of on the other side of the debate. Do you think provisions like these might have prevented the mortgage meltdown, or is this really going to just make the cost of doing business that much higher for these companies?
I think realistically it's more the latter. I think that we're going to see 2 types of whistleblowers come out of the woodwork. The first is one who wears the hat of a private attorney general and approaches these cases in good faith and looks for an opportunity to protect the company's shareholders and the company's employees alike. Those types of whistleblowers approach these scenarios with a real religious zeal. The second type of whistleblower, on the other hand, often arises in the form of an employee who's either disgruntled or looking for some form of leverage in the employment relationship. In other words, an employee who sees the writing on the wall and, to put it in crass terms, may say, I have some dirt on the company or on my supervisor or on my employer, so I want some sort of leverage to either get a sweeter or richer deal in terms of my current employment terms or in connection with a severance package, perhaps.
Now, Stephen, I know that you do a lot of work where you actually work with the companies to help them to prepare for provisions like these. I want to hold it there, though, because we have to go into a break. We're going to continue our conversation with how you work with these companies to prepare for whistleblower provisions. In just a moment, we have Reuben Guttman, Steven Pearlman, 2 attorneys debating the whistleblower provisions in Dodd-Frank. Let's go back, though. We were talking just a moment ago, Stephen, we were talking about companies and what you do to prepare them for this. How much have they had to staff up, and how much in extra costs are they anticipating should we see these provisions take full effect?
Sure. Companies have been taking the Dodd-Frank law and the Sarbanes-Oxley provisions back in 2002, and now as they're currently amended as of July 30th, or July 21st, excuse me, very seriously in allocating far more funds to compliance. There's a couple of things that companies are doing to prepare for the flood of whistleblower complaints. The first is that companies are developing mechanisms to compete with the bounties that the Dodd-Frank Act offers. The Dodd-Frank Act, as you said, provides bounties of between 10% and 30% of recovery that exceeds $1 million.
Stephen, hold
by the
on right
SEC.
there, because I had not realized that. That's the first I'd heard that. Just how much are these companies sort of setting aside?
Companies this is a nascent area. This is brand new for employers, so it varies and there's no set formula that companies are setting aside. Companies are trying various approaches. Some companies are trying to monetize an incentive to keep the complaint internal. Other companies are giving thought to enhancing performance evaluations where employees seek to enhance accountability and seek to decrease the amount of fraud within a company and do so in good faith.
Reuben, can I just turn to you for a moment? I just want to bring you in on this point. When you have a client who comes to you with a potential whistleblowing situation, what's the first thing that you tell them? Do you tell them first to look to their employer?
Well, it depends on the circumstance. I mean, we have a situation, for example, like a Pfizer, which went through 3 corporate integrity agreements and continued to violate the law. And there may be companies like a Pfizer in certain circumstances, or perhaps even an Enron, where there's not going to be a viable internal compliance program to work with. So you've got to take it on a case-by-case basis. I've got to tell you, though, that what I'm hearing is, quite frankly, stunning. That companies will be paying money to compete with the Securities and Exchange Commission in terms of these bounties, because if the end result is you've got a situation, for example, where a drug is put on the market and it doesn't work and an employee is getting a bounty, and the essence of that is to maintain the confidence of a problem that not only impacts shareholders but consumers, you know, that's going to have a devastating effect. So I think that is, quite frankly, a stunning admission that I'm hearing from my colleague, not in Washington, but in Chicago, because we're actually switched. Yes.
Yes. Stephen, quickly respond to that. We only have about 30 seconds right now.
Sure. It cannot be construed as any sort of an admission that the company would want to keep the complaints internal, because that provides the company now with the opportunity to utilize its audit committee and to utilize the procedures that it's used through the mechanisms mandated by Sarbanes-Oxley.
We're going to hold it there. We're going to be back in just a moment. Thank you both.